check.
What's up everybody, my name is AAA and I don't know if you guys know this, but the Uncharted franchise is my favorite series of all time. And no, that won't sway me in game off because I try to use hard numbers so I can be more objective about it, but still, I freaking love everything about this franchise. I even have an Uncharted watch, and I have drawn multiple scenes from throughout the games. And when Uncharted 4 was announced, I was just waiting for 2015 to come so I can get my hands on it. And then it was delayed. 4 times. But when I was finally able to get it, it blew my mind and I absolutely adored it. And when they announced The Lost Legacy, I couldn't have been happier. And yet, as time goes on and more is revealed about this expansion and the future of the franchise, the more worried I get. Today I wanted to talk about if this expansion was warranted, if we really needed it, and if the Uncharted book is better off being left closed at this point. When Uncharted 4 was still a ways away, the people at Naughty Dog constantly referred to it as the end of the franchise, or at least that's how everyone took their words as. As things went on, they made it pretty clear that this would be definitively the end of Nathan Drake's story, which, while being a little sad, does make a lot of sense. Naughty Dog isn't known to stretch out characters just for being a cash grab like what happened with Lara Croft or Sonic. And sure, those games came back better with reboots, but the middle stuff was unnecessary. Think about it, they made 3 great core Crash games and then 1 really good racing game as well, and then tapped out and moved on with the times, creating 3 core Jak and Daxter games, and then a racing title, and then moving on. And then they made 3 Uncharted games, and then, it wasn't racing, but you could drive in it. They know how to do justice to a franchise and move on. Not overstaying its welcome, but also not feeling unfinished like the Half-Life series. When Uncharted 4 was announced, it left me feeling a teeny tiny bit skeptical in the back of my head because I thought Uncharted 3 had a pretty good ending. But upon playing it, I did think Uncharted 4 was necessary and an amazing story that wrapped things up better than any game I've ever played. The Last of Us 2 is another game that I currently don't think needs to happen, even though I'm over the moon that it is. But seeing as it's only the second game and Naughty Dog has pretty much a perfect track record for the past 20 years, I have faith in them for The Last of Us 2. Now you might be thinking, okay, what's the problem here? They know when to end things and they wrapped up Nathan Drake's story, so what's so harmless about The Lost Legacy? Well, it's not so much the game itself, but rather what it's opened up that has me worried. I'll get more in depth in that in a second, but first let's discuss whether The Lost Legacy itself was a game that we needed or just ended up being a bit of a cash grab. After the success of The Last of Us Left Behind DLC, not only commercially but also critically, Naughty Dog and their fans had a newfound love of DLC. And who could blame them? They packed an incredible story in a short amount of time that deepened the impact of The Last of Us and even pushed diversity. And with Uncharted 4 taking a couple cues from The Last of Us thematically and visually, it made sense that they would also want to add a DLC into the mix. The quote-unquote problem, if you can call it that, occurred when they realized that a 2 or 3 hour DLC may not be possible for this franchise as opposed to The Last of Us. See, The Last of Us was an intimate story. The show was stolen by its characters and their interactions, their hardships, and their will to survive. The scenery was gorgeous, but it would change up just to make the game feel more fresh, not because it was a massive vista that needed to be explored. That game was about story and survival, and you can tell a good story in 3 hours. To me, The Last of Us, and especially Left Behind, played like interactive movies. Uncharted, on the other hand, is another story. Yes, the characters and plot are very important, especially in the 4th, but such a huge cornerstone for the game is adventure, seeing massive landscapes and exploring, moving from location to location, climbing around places and engaging with the enemy. The pull of this game goes beyond the story, it's the sense of adventure, and without that sense of adventure, I don't think it would feel at all like an Uncharted game. So consider the fact that they'd already wrapped up Nathan Drake, so they had to bring in a new character, or characters, and tell a good compelling story. That already puts it in the same sort of playing field time-wise as Left Behind, because it tries to tell a good story with good characters. It might even be a little longer just as that because Ellie was a well-established character, and to most people Nadine was pretty underutilized and Chloe had a smaller part in the 3rd Uncharted, and no part in the 4th, so we haven't seen much of her since the 2nd game. And that means there's a bit more character building that needs to be done with both characters to start off. Then you throw on top of that you need massive locations and the ability to climb and explore versus the intimate location of the mall for Left Behind. If you had that in an Uncharted game, it just wouldn't make sense. You can see why The Last of Us could get away with something smaller and The Lost Legacy had to go bigger. So to me it makes sense that they made this a much longer adventure. I have no problem with that. In my opinion, Uncharted 4 could have easily stood as is and no one would be really expecting a DLC, and it all would have been fine. But the decision to make one is perfectly acceptable, especially if they put real time and effort into it. So in that sense, I don't think the game is needed. It's not quintessentially important to the games we know. It will certainly expand the world and be a fun ride, but it wouldn't feel like I was missing out on anything story related if this expansion didn't exist. However, I do think it's warranted. Just because something isn't fundamentally needed doesn't mean it has no right to exist. And this game is shaping up to be amazing and another great entry in the franchise. As for whether it's a cash grab, well, you're getting a brand new story with new protagonists, you're getting beautiful sights that go back to the older Uncharted games where everything was just unbelievably large and crazy, unlike Uncharted 4 which still has amazing locations, but it was a little bit more grounded, especially the lost city that they found seemed more like a real thing that would have been built, unlike Shambhala or something like that. And honestly, I enjoyed both approaches, but this does take it back to those larger areas, and you're also getting the return of a proven formula that's about as long as the first Uncharted game from what we're hearing, which is a good 8 hours long, and that's all for $40 American and $50 Canadian, which I think all that included is a pretty good deal, and I don't think Naughty Dog is trying to cheat anyone out of anything. They wanted to do a DLC and it grew into something more, and that's okay. I don't have any problems with that personally. My problem comes with what happens after. The Lost Legacy is now a standalone experience and it's eerily close to being an Uncharted 5. It stopped a little short because it looks and seemingly feels a lot like the same style and gameplay as we had in the fourth Uncharted, and this does in some ways seem like an add-on to that game. It's also shorter, which helps in that case, but I definitely still classify it as a type of Uncharted 4.5 or even like a 4.75. It's really damn close to being its own title as an Uncharted 5. With the release getting closer, some execs have talked about how they discussed a lot of characters and kept coming back to Chloe, and that this world that they created is diverse and full of rich characters that can potentially be explored in the future. And now they're starting to take a stance that anything is possible for the future of the franchise, and some of the stuff that's being discussed makes it seem like there are more titles that are going to be coming in the future. Whether Naughty Dog will be at the helm or not is unclear, but the story kind of went from Uncharted 4 being the final Uncharted game to there's almost definitely going to be another one at some point. And you might be thinking, well, if this is your favorite franchise, shouldn't you be happy about this? Well, there are three big things that stop me from feeling that way. The first thing is simply oversaturation and churning out bad games. I don't think it's going to be as bad oversaturation-wise as something like Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed, since those games come out every single year, with a couple of exceptions here and there. But still, Uncharted is a big game that stands for quality, and it's always anticipated because it feels new, fresh, and like the developers took their time on it. Now, if you go down the line to Uncharted 5, Uncharted 6, and Uncharted 7, even the name itself, that whole feeling disappears. That would be a real shame since the franchise is yet to record an objectively bad game. And no, Uncharted 3 was not bad, it was just hit with the unfortunate expectation to be just as big of a jump as what we see only once or twice in a generation in Uncharted 1 to 2, and playing them side by side with no context like I did in my first time playing, I thought Uncharted 3 was not worse than Uncharted 2 in any way aside from the pacing, since that game did seem to move a little bit too fast, but that was the only issue I had with it, and it is not a bad game and it is judged unfairly, and I will fight you on this. Sorry, I just really like Uncharted 3. Anyways, with oversaturation, it becomes less impactful and it blemishes the greatness of the overall series. Like I said earlier, Naughty Dog usually knows when something is over, and I still trust them as developers, but to me it seems like anything past the Lost Legacy is milking it and stretching it out unnecessarily. And unless it gets a hiatus for a long time and then Naughty Dog brings it back at a much later time, I just can't see them working on an Uncharted sequel past this expansion. But if they do decide to step aside, then that leaves the door open to another worry that I have, which is another studio picking the game up. People noticed the difference when Uncharted 3 was lacking some key players in its development, since at that stage the studio had split into two teams, with one working on that game and the other working on The Last of Us. Without the same team, people felt like the third was a little bit out of place. Now imagine an entirely non-Naughty Dog team working on an Uncharted game, which has the potential of happening. Not only is there almost no developer that makes games as well as Naughty Dog, but there's also no one that knows these characters and this world like Naughty Dog does, and handing the reins over to another studio could end up in a bunch of subpar releases that are done really only for the money and nothing else. And that's my initial worry dialed up to 11. And the final thing that worries me here is a little bit different than the others, and it's the fact that I just want to see something different. Look, I love the Uncharted games and it's my favorite franchise, but if you look at Naughty Dog's past 20 years, you can see an amazing game in Crash Bandicoot that had no bad entries and improved on the original with its sequels. Then you have Jak and Daxter, which was an even better game that had no bad entries and improved on the original with its sequels. Then you have Uncharted, which was an even better game which had no bad entries and improved on the original with its sequels. And finally we have The Last of Us, which is their best game to date in my opinion, and its sequel is shaping up to be amazing from just a teeny tiny teaser trailer. My point is, Naughty Dog is not a stagnant company. They will do everything justice and then move on to create something even greater. Every new IP has gotten better, and now that Nathan Drake's story is finally over, I want to see something new and awesome from these developers. I want to see them top The Last of Us. I want to see them put Uncharted to shame. I want to see them make you forget who Jack and Crash even are. I want them to blow us away, and I don't think Uncharted 5 will do that. We all know the basics, and no matter how much you try to refine and perfect it, it's not the same as a brand new IP. So what do you guys think? Are you okay with Uncharted continuing? Do you think it should just end here and Naughty Dog should move on to something new? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.